The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Zaqy Mohamad.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, sir, for allowing me to speak on a matter that will help grow the media industry here and that has been refined to address national security. The Film Act sets out the framework for regulating the distribution, exhibition, and possession of films in Singapore. MCI's amendments to the Act, following a wide review, aims to help develop our media industry in Singapore without undermining our religious harmony, racial harmony, public interest, and matters of security. MCI and IMDA's content regulatory approach reflects the community standards while providing more choices for consumers and protecting the young. I will touch upon four main areas of the bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker: formalization of the co-classification scheme, appeals against IMDA's decisions, clarifications on films classification, enhancements to IMDA's investigation and enforcement powers. Starting with the new films bill, which will formalize the co-classification scheme, IMDA has piloted co-classification by film content assessors, or CAs, for PG-13 and below, and CAs can only co-classify prescribed categories of films, PG-13 and below. I applaud this move as pro-business and the interests of the consumer. Moreover, this move also helps strengthen capabilities within the media industry to better understand classification guidelines and processes, while consumers can get access to films more quickly. I wanted to ask, since the scheme is optional, as films can still be sent to IMDA for classification, how has the response been from the industry in adopting this? However, from the IMDA point of view, I would also like to understand why it is, in a way, outsourcing its classification responsibilities. The intent of the films bill is to safeguard content standards. What are the safeguards in place to prevent newly formalized co-classification scheme from being abused? What happens in cases of misclassification? Have there been examples of such cases since it was piloted? Further, there is already an existing appeals process for film classification. Why does IMDA need film reclassification powers? Are there safeguards in place to prevent the abuse of these powers by IMDA? For instance, could IMDA be lobbied by interest groups or be put pressure on to reclassify controversial films to give them either higher or lower ratings? How do we ensure that this does not happen? On the Films Appeal Committee, currently the Films Appeal Committee comprises a mix of individuals representing the community, creative, legal and education sectors, as well as academia. How can we make the composition more representative of the community? Will MCI or IMDA take suggestions from the industry for suitable nominations to the FAC? I spoke to members of the film community, and they would like to suggest increasing the transparency and accountability of the FAC's decisions and not just receive an opaque reply. Would MCI or IMDA be open to be more engaging with the industry on the FAC's decisions? On appeals involving films with national security concerns, I'm satisfied that the amendments in the bill took into consideration that national security is one of the government's core responsibilities, as the FAC may not be privy to the full extent of concerns from security agencies due to the sensitivity of information. Some in the community had asked whether the FAC should be maintained as the appeal authority for films with national security concerns. There are concerns that if the ministers to decide on such appeals, they may not be able to represent themselves and explain the context of their work. So is it possible that appellants be allowed to make in-person representations to the minister or the FAC as part of minister's consultation process? Will the FAC be consulted before a minister decides on the appeals involving national security, and whether their inputs will be given weightage in this process? Replacement of NAR with refused classification. A very small number of films that exceed acceptable community norms or against public interest are not allowed for distribution of public exhibition. Such films are currently determined to be not allowed for all ratings or NAR, and under the new FA, such films will be refused classification by IMDA. Why is there such a change in terminology? And is this change really necessary under the legal construct of the amended Act? Because as I understand it, the NAR is just a simple change in terminology. Then can the ministry confirm that there is no change to its meaning or application with the new refused classification terminology? I understand there have only been 2 such films that have been classified as NAR or prohibited in the past. So what are the thresholds and how are the norms and boundaries of public interest defined? Through my interactions with the local film industry, they are concerned that the new term refused classification could also be misunderstood by the wider international film community and affect the reputation of our filmmakers and films. They are also concerned that the term implies that the film is not viewed by IMDA prior to classification. I know Minister probably have to watch many of these films to decide. So can the industry be assured that all films will be viewed prior to being branded refused classification? If the Minister decides on appeals for films that are refused classification for undermining national security, how will the appeals process for such films change from current procedures where appeals are submitted to the FAC under the existing FA? Under the new Act, IMDA will undertake the enforcement authority from the police. These include powers to request information, such as documents, as well as interview persons and take statements of suspected breach of FA or licensing conditions. As such, the IMDA enforcement officers will be granted powers to enter, search, and seize evidential materials, such as filmmaking equipment, to enforce against FA offences. How has the IMDA been enforcing against FA offences thus far, given the gaps in enforcement and investigation powers? Have MCI or IMDA considered the merit of continuing with the existing enforcement framework where IMDA relies on the police, where it does not possess the requisite enforcement and investigation powers, and what were the compelling reasons to make this change? Have the IMDA or the police had to use without warrant powers in the past? If not, why are these powers, including the use of reasonable force in obtaining entry, necessary? Can the ministry clarify under what types of offences does the power of searching without warrant and to enter, search, and seize evidence come into force? So in the case where the offence is the illegal distribution of film, will items such as filmmaking equipment, because by nature filmmaking is not an offence under the FA, only distribution is, or non-relevant items like handphones, computers, which are not related to the distribution or storage of evidence, be seized too? What is the recourse for those affected in view of privacy concerns that personal and private content may be searched through by the authorities? What kind of processes does the IMDA put in place to ensure proper checks and balances when the enforcement officers carry out enforcement activities, especially for the entry and seizure of without warrant? In particular, for new enforcement officers who may have very little or any relevant experience, what are the safeguards in place when they carry out the above activities? We have to assure the public that the processes are in place to prevent the abuse of authority. For one, we need to ensure accountability of the enforcement officer's actions and that the enforcement powers are exercised judiciously. For instance, all entry and search will be authorized by senior IMD officers holding the title of director or equivalent. So what are training and internal processes in place to ensure that the IMD enforcement officers exercise the without warrant powers and force entry appropriately? With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support the bill.